This is clear politics. Hello, the world leader in steel production, a hegemon in the automotive industry, and finally proudly called the assembly shop of the planet. No, this isn't about China. These were the epithets that gave birth to the famous American dream. Now, though, machines have been traded for iPhones, and those are assembled in China. And in the US, the term Rust Belt appeared. That's a dozen states that went from economic boom to bankruptcy and poverty.
It's called the Heartland, the heart of a vast country. It was here, in the region stretching from New York to Chicago in the Northeast US, that the American superpower was forged. Dozens and dozens of steel mills, coal mines, iron ore mines, car and tire factories created the American dream, steeped in smoke and sweat, and then it all collapsed. Factories started closing one after another, workers ended up on the street, factory towns quickly fell into decline, losing their populations. The heartland turned into the Rust Belt. Behind this sharp metaphor lies the bleak despair of millions.
Who's to blame, and can anything be done? As always, we provide only the facts. You draw the conclusions. Let's take the period after World War II as our starting point, the peak of U.S. economic power. Pittsburgh is a typical example of cities that had it rough. Once the American capital of steel, in 1979 it produced 19 million tons of steel a year, a record. But by 2024, that number barely reaches 4 million.
Almost 30 years ago, Pittsburgh's unemployment rate was over 17%, and the city was losing thousands of jobs every month. The steel industry it depended on was devastated at the end of the 20th century by falling demand, high costs, and fierce competition.
The city lost 50% of its population, but attention, today that's still a success story. They managed to stop the exodus because Pittsburgh found a new niche in the last 10 years, and literally rose from the ashes. Locals even nicknamed it Roboburg for its concentration of robotics factories. But for every success story in the US, there are dozens of failures.
Most of the Northwest US, Illinois, Indiana, Michigan, Ohio, Pennsylvania, and others, is the Rust Belt. Up until the 70s, it was famous for its industry, but the heart of the steel giant stopped along with its brain. Detroit, which became a ghost town.
Detroit's unemployment rate is 18%, one of the highest in the country, as is its crime rate. Violent crime is 3 times the national average. At least 70,000 homes and lots are abandoned in the city. About 40% of the streets aren't even lit.
The thing is, many factories were city-forming enterprises. This hit the auto industry especially hard. For example, Detroit, once the world capital of car manufacturing, turned into slums where mostly marginalized people now live.
The blame lies with greedy businessmen. Chasing profits, factories were moved to Japan, South Korea, Indonesia, where labor is cheap, or to Mexico.
Labor was the main cost in production. In Asia and Latin America, labor cost just pennies compared to the US. Moreover, there was no need to worry about social benefits, pensions, or labor laws. or to meet workers' demands. It was even better than using robots. Millions of jobs simply left the Midwest for outside the U.S. The steel belt rusted.
Hundreds of thousands of American workers were left with nothing.
The decline in manufacturing led to the closure of factories, plants, and mines. It caused unemployment to rise and shrank the tax base. The situation was made worse by the mass exodus of skilled and educated people. According to the U.S. Census Bureau, the Rust Belt states have the highest poverty rates in the country, with up to 1.5 million people leaving since the 80s. For Americans who live by the saying, "Born here, stay here," that's a disaster.
Since the 1950s, Cleveland, Detroit, and Gary have lost up to 60% of their populations. Other Rust Belt cities saw serious outflows too.
The centers of many big cities, Detroit, Flint, Cleveland, Pittsburgh, Erie, Duluth, Buffalo, Binghamton, Rochester, Akron, Toledo, are almost deserted. Those who stayed have become increasingly marginalized. People turn to addiction and crime.
When businessmen bet on cutting labor costs, they somehow ignored the simple fact that there are far fewer people who can invent or develop things than there are people who just need jobs and income. So they set a huge social time bomb for themselves, which exploded, and now the U.S. can't, even if it wants to, return to serious industry or restore its capabilities. They can't compete with the now strong countries of the so-called former Third World.
But cities lost not only people, but also tax revenue and thus their budgets. Businesses closed, downtowns emptied out. In the end, decay ate away at the cities. Abandoned factories, empty houses, schools, and churches became a common sight in many parts of the Rust Belt. This is what the streets look like there today.
There wasn't even money to dismantle and dispose of them. Now, many cities have giant buildings full of rusty equipment. Many have seen American action movies set in abandoned, rusted-out factories. Those are the shells of those very same abandoned plants.
The situation got worse because of the Democrats' misguided policies. They started relocating illegal immigrants to the Rust Belt. Springfield was hit especially hard.
Since early 2024, the Biden administration has been resettling Haitian refugees across the U.S. They mostly chose Republican states, supposedly to enrich them culturally. In Springfield, 20,000 Haitians were settled at once. That's a third of the city's population. This led to a total collapse of the city's social system. Haitians quickly clashed with locals. It got to the point where refugees started eating pets like cats and any other animals they could catch. Just another day in the U.S. in 2024.
The problem is these measures aren't very effective. They either create ghettos, poor crime-ridden areas that don't help the local job market, or the most active migrants just leave for other regions after a while. The US doesn't have a strict registration system like the Soviet Union did, for example. They don't have many tools to force people to live where the federal government tells them to.
The mentality of the locals also played a role. The American dream was built with smoke and sweat, steel mills, coal mines, ore mines, car and tire factories. But a new generation quickly grew up that didn't want to work in factories, at furnaces, or rolling mills. They preferred easy office jobs.
In 1991, China's share of U.S. industrial imports was 4.5%. By 2011, it was 23.1%. America focused on developing the tertiary and quaternary sectors. services and the knowledge economy. The motto became, "We Americans invent, they, the foreigners, do the hard work." Steel and auto giants in the Rust Belt, the backbone of their cities, closed one after another. The collapse of heavy industry led to a severe crisis in related sectors. The most obvious result was the brutal depopulation of once bustling industrial centers.
About 5 years ago, the White House started trying to revive the Rust Belt. There are always new programs to attract investment and develop services, but so far results are mediocre. Still, the government can't just abandon these half-empty cities. The Rust Belt plays a big role in U.S. elections, and these states have serious influence on the outcome. So, like it or not, they have to deal with their own failures. Some surprising statistics. Since 2010, 64,000 factories and plants have closed in the U.S. These numbers were cited by Donald Trump himself, a champion of reviving U.S. industry.
Again, the roots go back to World War II. Back then, Americans made $50 billion on loans and military equipment. In today's money, that's about $15 trillion.
On that fuel, Washington kept the ship afloat into the 21st century, ignoring the Rust Belt. They even got slapped by their closest ally, Japan.
The sale of U.S. steel, a national pride, to Japanese investors shows just how troubled our steel industry is today. The giant that fed the Iron Belt is now rusting with it. The fate of 15,000 workers is still unknown.
All this happened in Pennsylvania, and the workers' fate is simple: sent home without severance.
Even if we look at today, the state of American cities, even outside the Rust Belt, leaves much to be desired. San Francisco and Los Angeles are mired in homelessness, drug trafficking, and crime. New York, St. Louis, Seattle, Chicago face the same, and many other cities like Portland, Oregon. So overall, yes, most American cities are in crisis now. Most of these cities are run by Democrats, and their policies, tolerating crime, drug dealing, and so on, have led to the situation we see today.
But Americans have learned to put on a brave face and create illusions better than anyone.
According to the International Affairs Portal, the U.S. economy is in its worst shape ever. Last year, American banks closed nearly 400 branches. Up to 70% of Americans felt their bank accounts shrinking.
America is rushing toward an economic nightmare. So far, all of Trump's attempts, including tariffs, haven't worked. The chance of recession is up to 90%.
Indeed, by many measures, the U.S. economy is in a tough spot today. It still hasn't digested the social fallout from the 2007-2009 crisis. It can't seem to find a new model for long-term growth that would provide stable economic development. Relatively high inflation is also unusual for Americans.
Besides the Rust Belt, which has been decaying for decades, the U.S. economy faces other apocalyptic threats. First, COVID. Back in 2020, the U.S. stock market was losing an average of $40 billion a day.
In 2021, Joe Biden tried to fix things with helicopter money. Over $2 trillion was printed. But it didn't save businesses. In 2020-2021, about 5,000 small and medium businesses closed.
In 2024, it was Texas. One of the world's largest economies wanted independence to live separately from the other states, many of which it actually supports. Local authorities approved the construction of a $35 billion wall and pledged to block all traffic along the border. This certainly didn't do any good for the American economy. Then came the devastating wildfires in California. Even the most conservative estimates put the economic losses from them at $150 billion. At any moment, the insurance bubble could burst. We saw something similar back in 2008 during the mortgage crisis.
The US economy as it existed and as they were used to when they dictated terms to other countries, started wars, and even funded those wars, that's probably the last stable track they have left. That kind of economy is no longer possible without cooperation and equal sovereign dialogue with other international economic players. The US has lost its status as the world's sole economic leader. That's a fact.
Trump's tariff wars were an attempt to save the US economy in the long run. He knows the situation is dire.
So far, American consumers haven't felt the perfect storm in the economy, but by late May or early June, shoppers may see empty shelves and mass layoffs could hit retail and logistics. The main effects of ending trade with China will start to show in summer 2025, when the US could slip into recession. Molson Hart, CEO of toy company Viahart, wrote on X, "It's almost like we're speeding toward a brick wall, but the driver refuses to see it." By the time he does, it'll be too late to hit the brakes.
By the way, the US trade war with Canada, Mexico, and China is now estimated at $200 billion. Add to that $350 billion essentially given to Ukraine. That's a lot of spending. And money doesn't just grow on trees.
Returning to the 1970s, when America was one of the world's industrial giants, is simply not possible for the Trump administration. Though, I think they'll try to create some jobs in the US. That's what his trade wars are aimed at. And, like the recent Middle East tour, they're trying to attract major investments from the Persian Gulf monarchies.
Of course, today only the liberal media blame Trump for everything. Experts say the shrinking of America's financial power is actually a result of Bidenomics.
Trust in the dollar is falling because the US has frozen and confiscated other countries' assets in dollars and securities too often in recent years. As a result, many countries are looking for other options for cross-border payments and national reserves. Yes, the US national debt is a financial pyramid that will eventually collapse or deflate. But traditionally, low interest rates slow the growth of this pyramid, and inflation, which gradually devalues borrowing, makes the pyramid last even longer.
Simply put, the US economy, once the world's industrial and technological leader, now rests on those three letters. Of course, faith in the dollar and the American economy is still strong. But if that pyramid collapses...
Worse, the rot at America's core was largely ignored by the country's leadership and media before Trump took office. It's hard to imagine how thousands of abandoned factories went unnoticed. For example, the textile industry has moved to Bangladesh and other countries with cheap labor, so now anyone in the world can afford decent clothes. Still, no matter how little economic sense it makes to bring factories back to the Midwest, it's clear why locals like the idea. For most of a century, high wages and relatively low interest rates formed the basis for wealth distribution in the US, giving entrepreneurs opportunities and steady income to anyone willing to work. But like automation, offshoring jobs undermines the expectation of shared prosperity.
The US economy has huge resources and is still strong enough to withstand the decline and decay of dozens, if not hundreds, of cities. In movies, America is skyscrapers, fancy cars, and a comfortable lifestyle. In reality, it's also ghost towns that no one will ever return to. Take Michigan. The Rust Belt is offering $2,500 to move there. But even for money, not many people are interested. What other dark spots will appear on America's bright cover? There will surely be more. But for many, the image of the US is still shaped by stereotypes. Skyscrapers, yachts, limousines, and success stories. But there's another America, the America of the Rust Belt. Neglected, hopeless, and dangerous. At least now you know about it. Take care.